Every story you see on screen starts with cameras, scripts, and directors, but sometimes the real story begins in the quiet spaces in between. It was an ordinary evening on a film set in Los Angeles. The sun had begun to fall behind the studio walls, and the crew was packing up after a long emotional scene. The world saw only lights, makeup, and glamour, but behind the scenes, something far more human was happening. Keanu Reeves stood near the window of his small trailer. He wasn't posing or rehearsing. He was simply watching the sunset, lost in thought, his face calm, his eyes deep. Down the hallway, Sandra Bullock sat on the steps outside her trailer, a cup of coffee in hand. Her hair was tied loosely. Her eyes, though tired, still carried a kindness that fame hadn't taken away. They were co-stars, yes, but that evening, they were just two souls who had spent another long day pretending to be someone else, pretending emotions written by others, and somewhere between the lines of the script, truth had quietly found its way in. When the director called for a break, Keanu walked over. "You okay?" he asked softly. Sandra smiled. "Yeah, just thinking." He nodded. "About the scene." She looked up at him, half smiling. "Sometimes acting feels too real." He paused, then said something simple, the kind of line that stays with you forever. Maybe because real things can't always be acted. And in that gentle sentence, the walls between them faded. No grand gestures, no dramatic music, just honesty. As days turned into weeks, they shared more of those quiet moments, small, unplanned, unrecorded. They laughed between takes, exchanged glances that said more than words ever could. One night, after a late shoot, Sandra sat alone by the studio's old piano. The room was dim, and the city outside hummed softly through the walls. Keanu walked in quietly and sat beside her. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked. He looked at her, a little puzzled. "Pretending? Yeah," she said. "Pretending to be okay all the time." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hides 1,000 stories. "I don't pretend," he said. "I just choose peace." That line, "I just choose peace," would echo in her heart for years. Because in a world that often rewards noise, here was a man who found power in stillness. Sandra once told a friend, "He's the only person I've met who treats sadness with kindness." And that's what made him special. Not the fame, not the movies, but the quiet way he lived his truth. One day, they were filming a scene where Sandra's character had to cry. The script said nothing, no dialogue, just silence. The camera rolled, and she began to cry. But these weren't acting tears. They came from somewhere deeper. When the director called cut, everyone clapped at her performance. Only Keanu noticed her shaking hands. He walked over, gently placed his jacket on her shoulders, and said nothing. No one else saw it. No cameras captured it. But in that small act, Sandra felt something stronger than romance, understanding. That night, she watched the playback alone. The tears looked beautiful on screen, but she knew they weren't fiction. And for the first time, she understood that connection doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just exists, quietly, between two people who see the world the same way. The movie they were filming became a success. People around the world watched them together on screen and felt something real. The chemistry, the warmth, the way they looked at each other. It didn't seem acted. Soon, interviews began. Reporters asked Sandra the same question over and over. "Is there something real between you and Keanu Reeves?" She would smile politely and say, "We're just good friends." But somewhere deep inside, she knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't romance, not the kind people wrote songs about. It was something gentler, the kind that grows in quiet understanding and mutual respect. Weeks later, while getting ready for another scene, a small accident happened. A crew member spilled hot coffee near Sandra's hand. Before anyone could react, Keanu rushed forward, grabbed a tissue, and checked her hand carefully. It wasn't serious. But his concern was real. No cameras were rolling. No audience was watching. Yet that moment, that tiny, almost invisible act of care, said everything about who he truly was. Sandra tried to laugh it off. "You always show up at the right time." Keanu looked at her and said softly, "That's what real friends do." It wasn't a confession. It was something deeper, a truth spoken through kindness. When the movie ended, the world didn't stop talking. Magazines wrote headlines. Fans made theories. Everyone wanted to believe they were in love. But Keanu and Sandra stayed silent. They didn't owe the world an explanation, because what they shared wasn't for show. Months later, they met again. this time at a charity event for orphaned children. Sandra was the guest speaker, while Keanu had quietly donated in the background, choosing not to appear on stage. After the event, she found him sitting at the back, wearing his usual black jacket, smiling softly at the children playing outside. "You really are bad at hiding," she teased. He shrugged. "I'm just here to listen." She laughed gently. "You could have sat in the front row." He smiled faintly. "Front seats are for important people. You are one," she said. "Not here," he replied. "Here, the kids are the important ones." That moment said more about him than any movie ever could. While others chased fame, Keanu walked away from it, not out of pride, but humility. After her speech, they sat together outside under soft string lights. Sandra turned to him and said, "You inspire people without even trying." Keanu looked up at the stars. "I don't want to inspire them," he said. "I just want to remind them that goodness still works." They both smiled, letting silence finish the conversation. And in that silence, there was peace. Life moved on. They went their separate ways. New movies, new paths. But every once in a while, a simple text would appear. "Keanu, filming's over. Miss the quiet moments. Me too." The messages were short, kind, and honest. No flirting, no noise, just two souls staying connected through stillness. Then one day, a letter arrived at Sandra's door. It had no sender name, just her name written in neat handwriting. Inside, there were only a few words. "Some people don't enter your life to stay. They enter to remind you of the goodness you forgot existed." She didn't need to guess who it was from. It was him. She smiled, held the paper close, and whispered, "You never change." Months later, they met again at a film festival. Both their new projects had been selected for a joint panel called Truth in Storytelling. When they walked on stage together, the crowd cheered wildly. But the real story happened not under the lights. It happened in what they said next. Someone asked, "You both have this incredible connection on screen. Do you think it's something you can create, or does it just happen?" Keanu thought for a moment. "You can't create truth," he said. "You can only recognize it when it's there." Sandra smiled and added, "And when you do, you protect it, not for the world to see, but for your heart to remember." The hall went silent. Even the cameramen stopped moving for a second, because in that moment, they weren't acting. They were being real. After the panel, they slipped quietly out the back exit, away from the noise. Sandra looked at him and said, "You really did send that note, didn't you?" He smiled. "Yeah, didn't think it'd ever reach you." "It did," she said softly, "and it came when I needed it most." He nodded and looked toward the horizon. "Maybe we're all just letters in each other's stories," he said. She paused. "Then, what are we in ours?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe reminders of what real looks like." The clip from that event went viral. People everywhere shared it, saying, "This is what humanity looks like." But while the internet shouted, Keanu and Sandra stayed silent once more. One evening, she texted him, "The world's making noise again." He replied, "Then, let's stay quiet. The noise will fade." She typed back, "But this time the noise feels kind." He replied simply, "Then maybe we let it be." And that's how they lived quietly, truthfully, peacefully. Years later, an old journal surfaced, one of Keanu's. It contained small reflections he'd written during their first movie together. Day 47, she listens with her eyes. Day 89, she laughed during a serious scene. It broke the moment, but it fixed something in me. Last day she reminded me that gentleness is stronger than fame. Sandra found the journal one day and called him. "I read it," she said softly. He stayed silent for a moment, then replied, "You weren't supposed to see that." "Why?" "Because it wasn't meant to be a story. It was just me trying to understand what felt real." She smiled through her tears. "You did understand, Keanu. You always did." They met once more, by a quiet lake at sunset. She brought the journal with her. "I think this belongs to you," she said. He shook his head. "Keep it. It found you for a reason." Sandra opened to a blank page and wrote, "Dear Truth, thank you for finding us, even when we tried to hide." She handed him the pen. He added below her words, "And thank you for proving that kindness never needs proof." They closed the book together. No farewell, no promises. Just two people who understood that not every connection needs an ending. As the sun faded, Sandra whispered, "You know, people still think our story was scripted." He smiled gently. "Maybe that's the best kind, when truth looks too beautiful to be planned."